iTracker 360 webinar. I just took myself off mute, so this time if you can hear me, please put something in the chat window that says you can hear me. Okay, everything's good. So in today's webinar, I want to show you some stuff about iTracker, and what I'm going to cover is basically the Leadsource ROI report, which is a report inside Infusionsoft to help you do ROI reporting. There's a Leadsource ROI by category report. There's a Sales by Leadsource report, which is a custom report that we wrote inside iTracker. There's the iTracker URL builder to help you kind of track your ads. So if you're running different Facebook ads or different LinkedIn or AdWords or Twitter ads or whatever they are, and you want to track, which ads are converting and, making you the most money, you'll have to build a custom URL, and then you can use those reports that I just showed you to help you, monitor or measure that. Another thing I'm going to show you is how to manage and organize your lead sources. So let's say you have a lead source for somebody that apps.facebook.com, and then maybe es-es.facebook.com, whatever that is, or mobile.facebook.com, and you really want all those contacts to just have one lead source called facebook.com or whatever it might be. And so how do you just automatically reassign people from one lead source to another just to help you manage your reporting better? So we'll cover that. That's called the lead source organization feature. And then I'll show you kind of some advanced stuff. A lead source ROI stats report that I wrote for a client of mine, and it basically shows all the lead source information by category, the particular lead source, the advertisement that they did, the vendor of that advertisement, the medium, which is email or banner or whatever it might be, the status of that advertisement, the date ranges of when that advertisement ran, and then some stats as far as the number of contacts, how many people purchased an intro product, the cost per intro product, and then how many actually bought the main product, and then some revenue and ROI calculations and some webinar percentages and stuff. So this is kind of more advanced stuff. We'll talk about that toward the end. And then hopefully I can talk about some direct mail options that I've seen people do in the past and how they've used direct mail with iTracker, and they've had some good success with that. So let's get started. Once you create an iTracker account, you're basically inside our iTracker member section. The first thing you need to do is get up and running. You need to install iTracker, and we have some consulting offers or services to help you do that, but I would recommend just clicking the setup guide, installing it yourself, and then we have some steps to kind of help you through that process. And if you run into some issues, submit a support ticket or whatever you think's best. Feel free to contact us, but we ask you to go through our support channel. Once you have iTracker installed and you're running advertisements, let's say for this example I'm using Facebook. So what I did is I went into iTracker, I built a URL to go to reportmojo.com to advertise an ad called Stick Rate, which is the subscription stick rate report. So I just wanted to advertise that, and so the idea here is that I build this custom URL, I take the URL down here, and I put that in my advertisement. And if you scroll down to the bottom of the page, there's actually a history of all the URLs that you build. And I'll talk about some best practices in a second, but on Facebook, that's where you would build your ad, and you would put that custom URL and drive people to your site. And that tracking data would get passed along through the URL. They would land here, they would click Get Started, and then in here, the UTM parameters, this is the tracking data that came from the URL builder, and this would be passed along into Infusionsoft for that contact. And so an example here would be, here's a guy with the lead source called Facebook PPC Stick Rate. And so that would in turn drive all of our ROI reporting based around this lead source field. So that's how a lot of people do ROI reporting inside Infusionsoft. And I'll get into some more details about that. But as far as building these ads and setting, the URL with the tracking data, I want to talk a little bit about building these URLs and some of the best practices. In the URL builder, there's the GA source, GA medium, GA campaign. So that's the source, medium, and campaign. There's also the GA term, GA content fields. And so those are the fields that we have you create when you first sign up an iTracker account. And that's where we store the tracking data. So we have some little shortcut buttons here to help you set those fields for you. But you can put anything you want in these fields. You can also override the lead source, but I would recommend just leaving the lead source the way it's generated. And if you want to change the way this lead source is generated, maybe you want source, medium, and term, you can actually change that inside the iTracker section. There's this link on the sidebar called Dynamic Lead Source Settings. But anyhow, once you build these custom URLs, and let's get into the best practices. So if you're going to be advertising, and this is just for an example, let's say you're advertising on Facebook and you want to build a sidebar ad. So this is where I would set the source as Facebook's sidebar. It's probably not a good practice to just put Facebook, kind of like what I did, but if you want to get a little bit more, I guess, granular, to really pinpoint, is it the news feed, is it the fan page, is it the sidebar, you can kind of, put something in that field to kind of help you with that. And then for the medium, you can use CPC, CPM, email, banner, whatever it might be, or PPC. It's really up to you, and that's kind of depends on how you want to do your naming conventions. But if you're using iTracker Ultimate, there's a history of all the URLs that you built. So if you have multiple people building these URLs, they might say, well, I can't remember if we're using CPC or PPC. Well, they can at least look at the history of what you've built and kind of follow suit with the naming convention. For the campaign, that would be, if you were doing like this, in summer 2014, if you were advertising some free trials, you could set that field. There's a content field that, if the ad was saying something like measure Infusionsoft ROI when using Google AdWords, you could set the content to something like this. I don't recommend putting complete sentences or long, really long descriptions in there because you're going to be using this for reporting purposes. And I would recommend keeping things short. I would also say use a lowercase naming convention, because when you're reporting inside Infusionsoft, or if you're using Google AdWords or some other reporting system, they might treat uppercase and lowercase differently. So it's a good practice just to do everything in lowercase and keep it all the same. I'd also suggest using hyphens and underscores whenever you're setting these fields. And the reason why is because other characters can become URL encoded. So if you put a space, and let's say down here, I set the UTM source to this is a test. When you actually build the URL, these fields have to get URL encoded. So they could be encoded with a %20 for a space, and that's how you encode a space. You would put %20. A question mark or a quote symbol or an apostrophe, those all get encoded differently. So, or it depends on the encoder. It might use a plus sign. So depending on what you're using to build a custom URL, those fields could be encoded differently. And then likewise, the decoding can work differently as well. It really depends on what language and what technology you're using to encode or decode URLs. And that's a little technical, but what I'm trying to say is just use hyphens and underscores because those do not get encoded. And you don't want to see these weird characters through your reporting inside Infusionsoft or whatever you're using for reporting. So it's just a good idea to stay away from that. So for this example here at the top, iTracker is going to, by default, use the source, medium, and campaign to create a lead source. So it takes, Facebook sidebar, hyphen, CPM, hyphen, and then the campaign, summer 2014 trial. So this would be the default lead source that we would create, with iTracker. So that's just some best practices with using the URL builder. And I have a little video series. It's just 2 videos. I'll be adding more to that when I get some time. But that's that. So after you build a custom URL and you have your advertisements up and people are clicking on those ads, you're driving them to your website, they're actually converting into a lead and you've captured that tracking data. And they're inside your system and they have a lead source set that's meaningful to which advertisement or marketing medium or whatever you're using. So now what do you do now? Basically you're ready for ROI reporting. And if you haven't got to this point, then that's where you need to get to. So you basically want every contact in your system with a lead source that's somewhat meaningful. And you can use eye tracker for that. Infusionsoft has a tracking code. The lead source generated won't be as specific as you can get with eye tracker. Like for instance, all leads from Facebook would just say Facebook, using the Infusionsoft tracking code. With eye tracker, you can build custom URLs, get a little bit more granular. You can manage those lead sources and do some other stuff with it. You can also run eye tracker and the Infusionsoft tracking code at the same time. That's not going to hurt anything. And actually, that's really what I recommend is kind of running both of them if you can. So let's jump into Infusionsoft and I'll show you the lead source ROI report. So you can access this report by going to Infusionsoft Marketing Reports and then going to the bottom and there's lead source ROI and there's also the lead source ROI by category. So for this example, I'm only going to run this report for just these two lead sources. And these are two little Facebook campaigns I did a while back just to get some sample contacts and some expenses in there just so I can kind of run webinars and show people how this stuff works. And so right now I have two lead sources. There's a free dashboards advertisement that I ran and then the stick rate advertisement that I ran. You can enter expenses for each of these, so it's like you spent $46 on this advertisement and then $150 on this advertisement. You can enter these expenses if you just click on the actual lead source and then go to the expense tab. And you can enter recurring expenses or one-time expenses. It doesn't matter however you want to do that. So back to the lead source ROI report. If you don't enter expenses, then you're not going to get any kind of ROI percentage calculated. So it's a good thing to enter expenses. And if you don't have any to enter, just don't enter any. You'll have $0 for expenses. So the revenue, that number is actually generated a little differently than you might think. So I actually want to create an order, on the webinar so you can see what happens to this number for the revenue. So right now I have 3 contacts that have this Facebook PPC stick rate lead source, right? And I'm going to go into these 3 contacts. And there's one of them that's just my account. So I'm going to generate an order for this record. So I'm just going to add an order, and I'm going to click Save. So right now we have a blank order. There's really there's no order items. There's no payments. I mean, it's just a blank order with nothing on it, right? So I'm going to jump back into the lead source ROI report on a different tab, and watch what happens to the number of customers you get. So my customers actually incremented by 1. So I have 3 contacts, and then since I added the blank order, I have 1 customer. So that might not be really what you want to happen, but that's just what happens with using this report. Hopefully that doesn't happen a lot. So just kind of be aware that does happen. So if you are creating blank orders for people, that could happen. So there's 1 customer, but the revenue is still at $0. So let me show you what's going to happen to revenue now. So I'm going to go back into this customer where I created the actual order. Let me actually clicked on the wrong one. So I'm going to click on the 3 contacts, go back to the order that I opened, but there's no order items. And so here's the blank order that I created. And I'm going to add an order item. I'm just going to do a test product. And this test product is going to cost $60. So I'm just going to make a note that this is for testing. So here's the blank order. I added a $60 order item, but there's no payment, right? So let me jump back to the ROI report and let's see what the revenue says, because we haven't actually made any money. We just have an open order out there for $60. So the revenue actually goes up to $60, which again, it might not be what you expect, but that's kind of what happens with this report. And of course, if the payment is actually made, nothing changes here. It's just $60. So just be aware of that on your Leadsource ROI report inside Infusionsoft. So this report is still a pretty good report to use, and this is kind of the bread and butter of Infusionsoft with Leadsource reporting. They really put a lot of emphasis on the Leadsource ROI report. Now, if you wanted to kind of see these two lead sources aggregated by just, let's say, well, how much money was spent, or how much revenue, or what is my ROI with just Facebook in general, Facebook pay-per-click, you could run the lead source ROI by category. Now, you'll have to set the category on these lead sources, and you can just click the lead source and set the category. So I have these two set, so there's actually 8 contacts total, 1 customer, and then here's the expenses and revenue. So if I go to the ROI by category report, it actually just aggregates that stuff by category. So this is a good report, kind of, to get a bird's eye view of all your lead sources, but you have to set the categories on all of your lead sources to get to this point. So this is the lead source ROI report inside Infusionsoft, and there's some cost per customer, contact to customer percentages. There's also some other fields you can add to this. There's a visitor count, but if you're using the custom URLs where the parameters, you're setting the UTM parameters, the visitor count is not really going to make any sense, because the Infusionsoft tracking code actually sets the visitor count, but they don't recognize those parameters. So the visitor count will be a little bit construed if you are using, the custom URLs. But again, you can use Google Analytics for, the number of visitors if you want. So, okay. Let's jump to the iTracker section, and I'll show you the sales by lead source report. So you can access this by just going to the iTracker site, logging into the member section, and then on the sidebar there is a sales by lead source report. And you can only get to this if you're an iTracker Ultimate member. And so for the sales by lead source report, this is not the lead source ROI report. It's more just a custom report that we wrote. And so what you can see in here is basically your lead sources, how many people are assigned to that lead source, cost per lead, which is calculated from the expenses that you enter, the number of customers, the total sales, the cost, which is total expenses, your profit, which is basically this total sales minus your cost, and then average sales. But there's also a cool thing, that this percentage to the right, that column is really percentage of total sales. So if you want to see, of all these lead sources, what does that actually represent as far as total sales? You can see that. If you want to filter this by, date range, you can set a start date and then an end date and hit filter, and then your percentages and everything will be recalculated, and so you'll get something different. So this is a pretty straightforward report. We just built it, out of the box. It's kind of just an out-of-the-box report that we have for, our members. So there's not a whole lot to show in this. It's pretty straightforward. And I do want to point out, though, when you are looking at your ROI report, and let's say you see, and this is even inside Infusionsoft or whatever you're using, you might have something like this. You might have a lead source called Facebook.com, web referral from Facebook.com, and then you also might have another lead source from Facebook.com, but it's actually apps.facebook.com, and you might say, well, I really want to take this total sales, this revenue amount, these customers and all this stuff that's attached to this lead source, and you really want to put them into this lead source up here. So where you have 49 people, you'd really rather just say, let's add this one person in here and say 50, and then the $500 in sales, let's add it up here to this total sales. That way everything is, more accurate. So that's where you can use the lead source organization feature. And inside iTracker, on the sidebar, just click the lead source organization feature here. And what you can do with this, and this is pretty powerful. I actually built this a while back, and I really like it. But these are all lead sources on here. Everything in here is a lead source, right? And so the idea is that you drag lead sources over to the left, and then they become an orange color. And those are your main lead sources. So everything on the left is what you're going to see on your lead source ROI report, your sales by lead source report, or any custom reporting you might have done. You don't want any contacts assigned to the lead sources on the right. You want them all assigned to the ones on the left for the most part. So once you set your main lead sources, you can come in here and say, and I'm just going to scroll down and find the Facebook one that I was using as an example. So here's the Facebook example that I was showing on the lead source report. So here is that lead source, apps.facebook.com, with one person assigned to it inside Infusionsoft. And what I've done is I checked the main lead source, and then I checked the sub lead source, and then I just updated it. And you can check, a bunch of them at all at once, and you can update it to this main lead source. So once you have this set, every night iTracker will actually look into look at your contacts. We'll download your contacts, and we'll say, okay, here's a contact record that has an old lead source of apps.facebook.com, and now we're going to update them to webreferral-facebook.com. And this nightly sync will happen, nightly. And this will keep your lead source ROI reports really organized. So this is kind of a history, a running stat of batches that we run every single night, and you can click on that and see who got updated to what lead source. And all you have to do is just set your main lead sources and then organize them. If you're running, if you have lead sources, for instance, like that Facebook PPC stick rate report. So here's that lead source, that Facebook pay-per-click stick rate, where I have those 3 contacts assigned to it. I don't really have to put that under a main lead source because this isn't going to have any sub-lead sources under it. So I can just leave that one down here at the bottom and not worry about it. But if you want to know how to use this tool, there's a video series on how to use this tool as well. It's really handy for organizing your lead sources. So, real quick, just kind of a review on lead sources. If you go into Infusionsoft, you open all your contacts, and you just hit Start Over. You search for everybody, organize it descendingly, and everybody in this list should have a lead source. So you can edit the criteria and columns and add the lead source field here if you don't have it, but basically every single contact should get a lead source, and that's what you should strive for. Otherwise, your lead source, your ROI reporting is pretty much worthless if you don't set these lead sources. All right, so we've covered the ROI reports. We've covered the custom ROI report. So let me show you this ROI stats report that I built for a client. And this I actually built using Report Mojo, and they just paid a consulting fee, and I built this for them. And so they laid out this report exactly like the way you see it. They wanted to know all the lead source fields here. They wanted to know the number of contacts for that lead source, how many people bought the intro product, the cost per product, so it's just simple division, how many of these people bought the main product, and then the cost per main product, the spend, how much revenue, all that created, and then the ROI. And they wanted to quickly be able to see, well, what's the negative ROI versus the positive one, so I highlighted them red or whatever. And then they also host webinars every day, and they have a webinar. So how many people actually registered for a webinar? And then of the people that registered for the webinar, how many actually attended? So what's the percentage on that? And then of the people that attended, how many of those people actually saw the offer at the end of the webinar? And so these are just kind of percentages that I calculated for them. And these are using tags. These are using products and a combination of tags and things like that. So that's kind of where a really advanced way of using these lead sources and the expenses, and then building a report that really fits your business model, and saying, this is the data that I really need to look at on a daily or a weekly or monthly basis. And so this is what I built for them. And then since they're pretty sharp with Excel, they basically come in here, they highlight all this stuff, and then they create a pivot table. And then now they can actually filter, by, well, what about the lead source vendor or the lead source medium? And they can come in here and start, really analyzing their data and adding filters and things like that with, dates and, however they want to do that. So that's a custom report that I built for them using Report Mojo. And that's really what I wanted to talk about with using iTracker and using the ROI reporting, the lead source organization feature, using custom URLs, some of the best practices with that. And then the next thing I want to talk about is the direct mail and then some of the tracking issues that I've seen people run into. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask, and I'll answer those now. If not, I'm going to keep going through the rest of this content, and I'm going to talk a little bit about direct mail. So last week I had a client who wanted to run an advertisement through a magazine. So they had a number of advertisements through magazines, and they wanted to drive everybody to an unbounce lead page. So what they do is they actually put a domain called mynaturalnose.com. So this is what actually shows up on the magazine, in the print ad. And so when they go to mynaturalnose.com, it actually redirects to their campaign landing page, and they set the UTM source to Metro, the medium is to print, because this was a print ad in a Metro magazine, and the content was nose, first thing people see. So this is, my nose is the first thing people see, and the campaign was their summer 2014 rhinoplasty campaign. And so this is actually a page in Unbounce, but they're able to use, iTracker with it. And once they fill this form out, they capture this tracking data inside Infusionsoft. The lead has that lead source, so now they can start doing some ROI reporting based on print ads. And this domain is not mynaturalnose.com, but they didn't really want to put this long URL in, the actual magazine, so they went and bought a domain through GoDaddy and said mynaturalnose.com, and then they just created a forward. They went in there and said, set this as a forward to this URL. And so that's how you can start doing, direct mail tracking. If you didn't want to buy, those different domain names, and you just wanted to have, one domain, so like maybe go.8west.ca, and then you could put /metro. And so maybe this would be the ad that you would put in your, your magazine advertisement or direct mail stuff, and they would go to 8west.ca/metro, and then that would redirect them to the URL that you just saw with the tracking parameters like that, which that was a broken page, but to the correct URL. So those are some different options with direct mail. And so kind of reviewing that, you could have, a single landing page using subdirectories, and so that's where you would do, /BC/metro, and that would redirect with the UTM parameters to your landing page. Option 2 is, you have one single domain name with subdirectories, and you could actually not pass the UTM parameters, and you could just hard code them in your tracking fields, in hidden fields. So there's so that's kind of an option. And then there's another way where you have multiple domains with no subdirectories, and they're driven to their individual landing page, which this is kind of what most people do. And you can hard code tracking data in the hidden fields, but the problem with this is that you have to build a landing page for every different advertisement. So if you don't want to build a different landing page for every advertisement, maybe that's just not feasible, because you might have 30 advertisements and you don't want to maintain 30 landing pages. You would just opt to use one landing page and then pass the UTM parameters and let iTracker grab that data for you. And whether you want to use subdirectories or not, there's options there. So that's kind of how people do direct mail tracking. And then real quick with some of the tracking gotchas that I've seen, over the years of doing eye tracker. I've been doing eye tracker for 3 or 4 years now, and these are some issues that I see with people when they actually sign up for eye tracker and they want to get set up and they want to use our stuff and start tracking and setting lead sources. But then they never really get their stuff set up. They kind of run into issues. And some of this is kind of technical, but this is kind of what I see, where people use iframes on their website, and if you look at the source of the iframe, it's actually coming from a different domain. So you might have a website called eyetracker360.com, and then you have a form on there that's hosted within an iframe, and that form is actually on Infusionsoft.com. So that's an issue because the tracking data lives on eyetracker360.com, but the form is on a different domain, and so now you have these cross-domain security policies where we can't read cookies in different domains. You will run into this if you use the Infusionsoft JavaScript snippet method to embed web forms. We do support this, but we tell people not to use that method. But it's up to you, what you want to do. But I see a lot of issues with that. There's issues where I see when they have a website up and you might go to domain1.com and it redirects them to a different domain, or it redirects them to a subdirectory on that domain. And what happens is in that redirect, whatever is doing the redirect, and there's like 20 different ways you can actually redirect somebody. They're not all the same, and some redirects overwrite browser headers and some don't. Some will pass URL parameters to the page and some won't. It really just depends, but in that redirect it causes tracking data to be lost, and so I see issues with that, and that's where all your traffic comes in as just direct or from your website. It's kind of weird stuff, so that could be an issue. Another issue I see is when people upgrade to Universal Analytics. So you were using Google Analytics, and then they said, hey, upgrade to our Universal Analytics stuff, and you can get more insight into the demographics of the people visiting your website, which I think Universal Analytics is really great. But if you're not using eye tracker and you're using something else and you upgrade to Universal Analytics, your tracking stuff might break. It really depends on how that tracking stuff's written. There's some other scripts out there in Infusionsoft that kind of mimics what eye tracker does, and those might not be compatible, so just watch for that. And also, if you are using eye tracker and you did upgrade to Universal Analytics, make sure you include eye tracker on every page of your site. Otherwise, you might run into problems. Sometimes there's these cross-domain problems where people have a link that take them from domain A to domain B. So when you send someone from one domain to another, there's issues where you can lose tracking data. So you have to do those links correctly to do that. I kind of say, put everything on one domain and just have all the tracking data on that domain, and then you can. It's a lot cleaner. It's a lot simpler. You don't have to worry about cross-domain stuff. If you're driving people straight to an Infusionsoft order form or shopping cart versus capturing their first name and email address before you redirect them off to an order form, you might be losing tracking data there. If you're using the Infusionsoft, like the new order forms that they have, you can't store custom field data on those new order forms that were released a couple years ago, and so that's an issue there. I would recommend trying to capture the tracking data before they actually place the order. That's up to you. There's kind of a trade-off there with, do I want to implement that or not, but then you get the tracking data and you can do better reporting. So really up to you on that. Sometimes people install Google Analytics and their implementations are off, and that really screws up the UTM-Z cookies that store the tracking data. So broken Google Analytics implementations can have that effect, and I see that from time to time, but most people are pretty good about just copying the snippet and putting that snippet right on their page, and without putting extra characters or line breaks or something like that in there. So bad JavaScript on your page, broken WordPress plugins, things like that could interfere with other code on your site, and that might break your analytics stuff or your eye tracker stuff as well. not following our setup guide, and then also for third-party forms. Some third-party forms we just can't work with because we don't know how it handles data. Other ones we can, like Unbounce, that print campaign I was showing you, that all uses Unbounce and it all works fine. You do have to be on the iTracker Ultimate stuff, and you might have to contact us to kind of help you get up and running with that. Hopefully I can get some tutorial videos on those third-party forms here pretty soon, but those are some of the tracking gotchas that I have with, that I see from time to time. So other than that, really, that's the end of the webinar that I just wanted to talk about, Leadsource ROI reporting, the Leadsource organization features, building custom URLs, stuff like that. So if you have any questions, feel free to email me. You can send them in as a support question if you just click support. You can email me, casey@itracker360.com. You can do that as well. I would recommend just going through the support channel. And we do have some questions and answers on the support stuff if you need that. If you want to sign up for iTracker Ultimate, you can use a promo code today. It's the promo code is webinar1, and I'll just put that on the screen. That's for a free 30 days free if you want to try out some of the features that I showed you and stuff like that. But yeah, that should be it, and I will have this webinar recorded unless something happened, but I will put it online here pretty soon, probably by today or tomorrow, depending on how soon I can get to it. So thanks for attending, and we'll be putting another webinar on next week, but it'll be more geared toward one feature versus kind of an overview of a bunch of features. So talk to you later. Thank you.